Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith is day 165. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 94 and 95 of the secundae, that is, of idolatry and of superstition in divinations. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code SUMMA10. And so here we go. Article 1. Whether idolatry is rightly reckoned a species of superstition. Within the article, if one is interested, St. Thomas gives a kind of overview of idolatry in Greek and Roman culture. But in brief, and in response to our article, idolatry misses the rule, the median, the mean of religion by giving worship which is due to the Creator to some creature. As St. Paul said in the letter to the Romans, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And as Aquinas summarizes here, quoting Augustine, anything invented by man for making and worshiping idols, or for giving divine worship to a creature, or any part of a creature, is superstitious. Article 2. Whether idolatry is a sin. It is a sin because it is contrary to reason to offer sacrifice, to offer created things in thanksgiving to anyone ultimately, but the one whom we are to be grateful for ultimately for all these created things, which is the Creator, the one true God. We are to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. We are to sacrifice to give back to God all that we are. And that sacrifice, which is primarily interior, must also, since we are material beings, be represented exteriorly, visibly, with external sacrifice, and to God alone. Therefore, it is a sin to worship creatures, to hold creatures of equal majesty to the Creator, and therefore to offer sacrifice to creatures. However, when it comes to the use of sacred images in the Church, or the veneration of saints, which are simply a means to stir up our devotion to God by imitation and by learning from the saints' example, and to assist our devotion to that which we know by faith, Aquinas describes, neither in the tabernacle or temple of the old law, nor again now in the church, are images set up that the worship of latria may be paid to them, but for the purpose of signification, in order that belief in the excellence of angels and saints may be impressed and confirmed in the mind of man. It is different with the image of Christ, to which latria is due on account of his divinity. Article 3. Whether idolatry is the gravest of sins. Remember that gravity of a sin stems primarily from the ultimateness of the end which this sin perverts. This is why sins against faith, hope, and charity are so very grave, because they are corruptions of what has God for its object. And we have something similar here. The virtue of religion is directed towards the reverence of God as its end. And since God is the ultimate end of all things, our ultimate end, then the perversion of religion by excess, which is superstition, is a very grave sin. Now, the gravity of that sin may be lessened by the diminished culpability of some particular idolater who may worship some wooden statue or polytheistic god out of a kind of ignorance. But even here, St. Paul says, what can be known about God, namely his eternal power and deity, is known commonly. That's in the letter to the Romans. But however culpable a man may happen to be, considered in itself idolatry is quite grave. In an analogy from St. Thomas, just as the most heinous crime in an earthly commonwealth would seem to be for a man to give royal honor to another than the true king, since so far as he is concerned, he disturbs the whole order of the commonwealth. So in sins that are committed against God, which indeed are the greater sins, the greatest of all seems to be for a man to give God's honor to a creature, since, so far as he is concerned, he sets up another God in the world and lessens the divine sovereignty. Article 4. Whether the cause of idolatry was on the part of man. Is the worship of false gods our fault? Is it man's fault? The Book of Wisdom describes one way in which idolatry entered into the world. This is from chapter 14. For a father consumed with grief at an untimely bereavement made an image of his child, who had been suddenly taken from him, and he now honored as a god what was once a dead human being, and handed on to his dependents secret rites and initiations. Then the ungodly custom, grown strong with time, was kept as a law, and at the command of monarchs graven images were worshipped. When men could not honor monarchs in their presence, since they lived at a distance, they imagined their appearance far away and made a visible image of the king, whom they honored, so that by their zeal they might flatter the absent one as though present. In general, idolatry was man's fault, inasmuch as the head of our race, Adam, forfeited for the entire race sanctifying grace along with what flows from it, the infused virtues of faith, hope, and charity, which would have presumably been handed down by inheritance, by God's gift, of course, if Adam had never sinned. But because Adam did sin, man is born into the world without the infused supernatural knowledge of God, without supernatural hope, a supernatural love of God, and this leaves us susceptible to make many mistakes when it comes to the knowledge and the love of God. Men worshipped idols first out of a sorrow for a lost family member, as the Book of Wisdom details, then out of awe for emperors or the idolization of the skillful works of craftsmen in constructing their idols, or even through provocation of demons working spectacular things out of these idols carved by men, and in order to lead men to worship the demons themselves. But ultimately, man is at fault because we opened the Pandora's box, so to speak, of all these evils when we forsook God at the very beginning. And with that, we move on to question 95 of Superstition in Divinations. Article 1, whether divination is a sin. What is divination? It denotes a foretelling of the future. Now, some future events can be known in their causes based on the nature of the thing, like I know for certain, when I let go of the stone, it's going to fall. And this way I can predict the future. Another way of predicting the future would be by conjecture, is the word St. Thomas uses. Like when the weatherman, based on his instruments, his learning experience, takes an educated guess as to what the weather will be for the rest of the week. Demons can do this too and are leaps and bounds better at it than we are. Finally, there is knowing the future for certain when voluntary agents are involved, like us, human beings. This can only be done by God. A, because God cannot learn. He knows all at once and always. He has no potential for change, no potential at all. He is fully act or pure act. B, he is the cause of all things, whether they are voluntary creatures or involuntary. He is the ultimate source of all change anywhere, ever. This was Aquinas' first way or proof for God. And being the cause of all change, he knows everything that is going to happen. Therefore, when a man presumes to know the future for certain, when it involves the actions of voluntary agents, he takes unto himself the divine prerogative. He usurps in his heart the throne of God, which is sinful. Now, this would be different, of course, if God were to reveal to a man something of the future. In this case, this man would be a prophet, and thus by proclaiming what God has revealed to him, he would simply be giving glory to God, which is not sinful. In a sentence and in response to our article, Aquinas writes, only is a man said to divine when he usurps to himself in an undue manner the foretelling of future events, and this is manifestly a sin. Consequently, divination is always a sin, and for this reason, Jerome says that divination is always taken in an evil sense. Article 2, whether divination is a species of superstition. Divination is a kind of false religion or superstition, if it be when a man seeks to certainly predict the future in the manner we've already described, unless he have the spirit of prophecy from God, as well as if he seek to know the future through assistance of the demons, which by the power of intellect, their range of knowledge, can take a much better guess at the future than ourselves, though they are not God, of course. Both of these kinds of divination, self-elevation in the first example and cooperation with the enemy in the second example, both of these actions are perversions of the due reverence to God alone, therefore they are superstitious. Article 3, whether we ought to distinguish several species of divination. And we ought to distinguish many different kinds of divination based on the difference of means employed in them. And there is an incredible amount of different kinds mentioned in this article, which I will refer the listener to the text if they're interested. But in brief, St. Thomas gives us 3 sweeping kinds of divination in the following words. Accordingly, it is clear that there are 3 kinds of divination. The first is when the demons are invoked openly. This comes under the head of necromancy. The second is merely an observing of the disposition or movement of some other being. This belongs to augury. While the third consists in doing something in order to discover the occult, and this belongs to sortilege. Under each of these, many others are contained, as explained above. The occult here meaning things that are hidden that one seeks to, by their action, to try and discover in a supernatural way through cards or dice or shapes and the like. All are included in the evils of superstition. Article 4, whether divination practiced by invoking the demons is unlawful. The demons only intend the destruction of man. Thus, he who takes the demons for his ally is a fool. And as that which is contrary to reason is sinful, invoking demons is unlawful. Plus, the demons hate God. Invoking them would be as unlawful as assisting a public enemy of the state. And although demons invoked may give information to men which is true, they are smart enough to use even true information to the injury of man. Again, because their intention is destruction, which is why it is not lawful to seek fellowship, assistance, advice from evil spirits who are, again, public enemies of all that is good. Article 5, whether divination by the stars is unlawful. Trying to predict the future of rational agents by the stars is unlawful, not only because it is truly vain and pointless, but again because it is attempting to be God instead of setting one's heart on following and obeying God. Although if one tries to determine physical things by physical causes, so be it. This is not evil and not what we mean by divination. St. Thomas writes, accordingly, if anyone take observation of the stars in order to foreknow causal or fortuitous future events, or to know with certitude future human actions, his conduct is based on a false and vain opinion. And so the operation of the demon introduces itself therein, wherefore it will be a superstitious and unlawful divination. On the other hand, if one were to apply the observation of the stars in order to foreknow those future things that are caused by the heavens, for instance, drought or rain or so forth, it will neither be unlawful nor a superstitious divination. Article 6, whether divination by dreams is unlawful. As answered briefly by St. Thomas, accordingly, we must say that there is no unlawful divination in making use of dreams for the foreknowledge of the future, so long as those dreams are due to divine revelation, but it will be unlawful in superstitious divination if it be caused by a revelation of the demons, with whom a compact has been made, whether explicit through their being invoked for the purpose, or implicit through the divination extending beyond its possible limits. Article 7, whether divination by auguries, omens, and by like observances of external things is unlawful. It is unlawful to receive supernatural, i.e. demonic, indication of the future through the cries of birds, or the sayings of men, or happenstances of people and things, or through the shape of a cloud, the arrangement of stars, etc. All this would likely just be a total waste of time, but it's also sinful because it is contrary to right reason. But if it involved the demonic in any way whatsoever, if it involved the intention to discover what one ought not to even desire to learn, the future in some particular arena, and via the supernatural assistance of demons, then all of this stuff is absolutely unlawful. Article 8, in our last article, whether divination by drawing lots is unlawful. Drawing lots here would be like pulling sheets of paper out of a hat, relying on the supernatural to manifest itself through the name drawn or the information found on the sheet of paper for who is to be chosen or what is to be done or what is going to happen. And again, if this is a way for a man to invoke demonic assistance, then it is unlawful. But if this is done simply because there is practically no other way to make a decision in some circumstance, and one simply trusts in God in the results, then this is not necessarily unlawful. Think about Matthias, how he was chosen in the book of Acts, where it is written, and they put forward 2, Joseph called Barsabbas, who was surnamed Justus, and Matthias. And they prayed and said, Lord, who knowest the hearts of all men, show which one of these two thou hast chosen to take the place in this ministry and apostleship from which Judas turned aside to go to his own place. And they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was enrolled with the 11 apostles. Also, according to Augustine, when persecution hits a city, for example, and some of the bishops ought to rightly flee for the sake of the survival of the church, yet some should stay for the sake of serving the faithful there. And again, there is no clear way to determine which bishops should stay and which should go. Sometimes it's just best to draw straws or cast lots, knowing that God's will be done. In Augustine's words, if at a time of persecution the ministers of God do not agree as to which of them is to remain at his post, lest all should flee, and which of them is to flee, lest all die and the church be forsaken, should there be no other means of coming to an agreement, as far as I can see, they must be chosen by lot. Which brings us to the close of another episode. We have just finished covering questions 94 and 95 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of idolatry and of superstition in divinations. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.